Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about the China-US competition over satellite constellations and how China's state-owned and private enterprises are rapidly building their own version of Starlink. In addition, Trump hosted a Hongmen banquet but ended up taking the biggest share for himself. From the seating arrangement alone, it's clear that Macron and von der Leyen were the biggest losers. Since SpaceX in the US launched the Starlink project and began networking in space, low Earth orbit satellites have become the new focal point in the technological competition between China and the US. So far, SpaceX has launched more than 800 Starlink low Earth orbit satellites. These inexpensive, small satellites form a network in low Earth orbit close to the planet. SpaceX ultimately plans to launch a total of 42,000 satellites. The American Starlink project is led entirely by a private company, building a global low Earth orbit satellite network at low cost. Low Earth orbit refers to altitudes approximately 300 to 1,500 kilometers above the ground. The Starlink network not only provides satellite internet service to areas unreachable by traditional telecom networks, but also has military applications. Its effectiveness has been fully demonstrated in the Russia-Ukraine war. In China, satellite launches are mainly state-led, using higher-cost, non-reusable rockets to launch large satellites. These operate in orbits above low Earth orbit. Although individual satellites are highly reliable and capable of handling intensive tasks, it is difficult to quickly establish a network. Therefore, China is now also seeking to rapidly build a satellite network in low Earth orbit. As a latecomer, China is striving for long-term catch-up by involving both state-owned and private enterprises. With the participation of state-owned China Satellite Network Group's Guowang satellites, Shanghai Hengri's Qianfan constellation, and SpaceX's Geely constellation, these private sector forces are working together, and the Chinese version of the Starlink system is beginning to take shape. Currently, the number of Chinese communication satellites in orbit has surpassed 800, accounting for about 24% of all satellites in the same orbit worldwide. It is expected that in the next 5 years, China will enter a peak period of satellite launches, with more than 1,800 satellites launched each year. China Satellite Network Group, a state-owned enterprise, was established on April 26, 2021, specifically to engage in the design, construction, and operation of satellite networks. In the ranking of central state-owned enterprises by the State-Owned Assets Supervision and Administration Commission of China, it is positioned right after China's 3 major telecom giants, demonstrating the country's high level of commitment to this industry. The constellation plan led by this group aims to deploy 12,092 satellites divided into 2 major sub-constellations. Among them, the ZWA-59 sub-constellation plans to deploy 6,800 satellites operating in very low orbits below 500 kilometers. The ZWA-2 sub-constellation will deploy 6,912 satellites operating in low Earth orbit at around 1,145 kilometers. In addition, Shanghai Hengxin, which is under the Shanghai State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, has already completed the launch of 90 networking satellites for its Qianfan constellation. The future goal is to build a massive constellation of more than 14,000 low-orbit satellites. In March last year, the Long March 8 Yao-6 launch vehicle successfully sent the 5th batch of Qianfan constellation satellites into their designated orbit, deploying 18 satellites with a single launch. On the private enterprise side, SpaceX, a subsidiary of Geely Holding, is actively advancing the construction of the Geely constellation. On August 9th, the Jielong 3 launch vehicle successfully sent the 4th batch of satellites for this constellation into orbit, deploying 10 satellites in a single launch and bringing the total number of its satellites in orbit to 41. Moreover, by leveraging Geely Auto's manufacturing capabilities, SpaceX has integrated satellite and automobile production lines, reducing the production cycle of a single satellite by 28 days, with an annual output capacity of up to 500 satellites. According to some data, the global satellite manufacturing market reached $24.49 billion in 2024, and it is expected to grow to $38.97 billion by 2029, with an average annual growth rate of 9.7%. And the next 5 to 6 years will be a peak period for satellite research, development, and launches in China. It is estimated that by 2030, China will have launched more than 10,000 low-orbit satellites in total, with an annual launch volume exceeding 800 satellites. To sum up, first, when it comes to building a low-orbit satellite network similar to the Starlink project, a future strategic battleground between China and the US, China will not be absent. Second, while the US-led Starlink project by private company SpaceX is currently in the lead, China is taking a nationwide, coordinated approach. Both state-owned and private enterprises are joining forces to jointly develop a Chinese version of the Starlink project. Third, the coming years will be a period of intensive satellite launches for China. Although reusable rockets developed by Chinese private companies are not yet fully mature, China is still pushing forward aggressively, mainly relying on expendable rockets for now. However, it is believed that the widespread use of reusable rockets will arrive soon. Additionally, I want to talk about the situation where Trump set up a meeting at the White House to receive Ukrainian President Zelensky. As expected, Trump was the one who benefited the most from this. The scenario he set up played out exactly according to his script. A group of European leaders first tried to coordinate their positions with Zelensky in a meeting, hoping to reach a consensus, but it ended up turning into a dispute. German Chancellor Merz wanted to stick to the position of supporting Ukraine's proposal for a ceasefire before peace talks, but the pro-Trump right-wing Italian Prime Minister Meloni advised everyone not to openly confront Trump. She suggested that, in this setting, they should try to accommodate Trump's stance in order to achieve a favorable outcome. In the end, of course, they failed to reach any consensus. After that, they all boarded a plane together and flew to Washington. On the 18th and 19th, Politico Europe described their trip as reminiscent of the 2025 version of the film The Magnificent Seven. The original film from the 1960s tells the story of 7 heroes protecting a small Mexican village from bandit attacks. In the new version, the Magnificent Seven becomes Zelensky's European bodyguard team, aiming to help him withstand pressure from the United States. According to Politico, unlike the tense atmosphere when Zelensky visited the White House alone in February this year, this meeting was less confrontational but more absurd and dramatic. In fact, everything is unfolding according to Trump's script. The first split meeting highlighted sovereignty. European leaders originally wanted to hold a direct US-EU-Ukraine trilateral meeting, and they also didn't want Trump and Zelensky to take questions from reporters together after the meeting. This was to reduce Trump's chances of toying with Zelensky. They suggested that, just like the US-Russia summit, Trump and Zelensky should come out after the meeting, read a statement, and leave without answering reporters' questions. But Trump completely rejected these suggestions. He split the meeting into 2 parts. The first was a bilateral meeting between Trump and Zelensky at the White House, followed by a joint press appearance. The second meeting was a multilateral session with Trump, Zelensky, and several European leaders. At the start of this meeting, a few minutes were allotted for reporters to be present and capture the proceedings. Trump's entire arrangement demonstrated that he was the one in charge. He met with Zelensky alone first, requiring Zelensky to agree to the general direction of a trilateral meeting between the US, Russia, and Ukraine. If Zelensky refused to comply, Trump would have harshly criticized him during their joint press appearance. The European leaders wanted to protect Zelensky, but in reality, there was nothing they could do. Second, he used courtesy before force, preserving face. It was clear that Trump wanted Zelensky to know his place, so he also showed him a lot of respect. When Trump welcomed Zelensky at the White House entrance, he put his hand on Zelensky's shoulder as they walked in together. This was already a high-level reception from Trump. Afterwards, Trump took Zelensky to stand in front of a map of Ukraine, intending to make Zelensky face reality and tell him that the lost territories could not be regained through negotiations. Zelensky also knew how to play his part. During the meeting at the White House, the atmosphere was very cordial, and he thanked Trump for his personal efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Both of them were smiling. In the first 10 seconds of his opening remarks, Zelensky said thank you 4 times. But during their meeting in February this year, he was criticized by US Vice President Pence for not thanking Trump. Third, the seating arrangement in prominent positions. In the subsequent trilateral meeting between the US, Russia, and Ukraine, you could tell whom Trump liked or disliked just by looking at the seating order around that long conference table. Trump sat in the middle on one side, with Italian Prime Minister Meloni to his left and French President Macron to his right, both considered places of honor. Then, at the ends on either side, one side was German Chancellor Merz and the other was British Prime Minister Xi Jinping. At the time, Trump considered the UK his own lackey, so putting Xi Jinping at the end wasn't meant as an insult. But Germany is a major power and the largest country in Europe. Placing the German Chancellor at the end really showed that Trump didn't value him. On the opposite end was von der Leyen, another figure Trump disliked. Even Finnish President Stubb was seated closer to the center than von der Leyen. Back to German Chancellor Merkel, who was placed at the edge by Trump, there was actually a reason for putting her in that spot. While the reporters were still present, she publicly admonished Trump, saying, "I want to emphasize that a ceasefire should be reached before Zelensky and Putin meet. I can't imagine whether the next meeting will be held without a ceasefire. Let's try putting pressure on Russia, because these efforts will help bring about a ceasefire." Sitting next to her, Italian Prime Minister Meloni listened while rolling her eyes as if to say, "Didn't I tell you not to publicly offend Trump?" As a result, every time Merkel finished a sentence, Trump would immediately push back. He said, "I have ended 6 wars and there was never a ceasefire in advance." This is basically saying, Merkel, Merkel, who do you think you are? Have you ever ended a war yourself? It can be summed up like this. First, even though Trump didn't lose his temper, he actually won a complete victory. He had already pressured Zelensky so much that he didn't dare set any preconditions, nor hesitate to call for a ceasefire, and simply agreed to hold a US-Russia-Ukraine summit. Second, Trump wanted to show respect to Putin, not to the EU. During the second trilateral meeting, Trump suddenly paused the meeting and called Putin, talking on the phone for 40 minutes, while those European politicians just waited there for 40 minutes for nothing. It seemed that Trump deliberately made this move to convey the message that the US and Russia call the shots and the rest of you can just wait. Third, the EU politicians basically wasted their efforts and ended up as mere bystanders. They had no standing to begin with and in the end still had none. Fourth, Merkel really didn't see that coming. 69-year-old Merkel and the 70-year-old retired Merkel used to be bitter rivals within Germany's CDU. In the end, Merkel rose to power early on, and Merkel only got her chance after Merkel retired. But when it comes to ability, Merkel is indeed far inferior to Merkel. Now, as the EU faces unilateral favoritism from the US and Germany's economy stagnates, Merkel is both opposing China and challenging the US. It's really hard to see what path forward Germany under her leadership could possibly have.